The waiting room smelled like old wood and expensive perfume. 7-year-old Daniel sat on a chair so big his feet couldn't touch the ground. He swung his legs back and forth, watching them move like pendulums while his mother nervously smoothed down her best dress for the third time in 5 minutes. She had told him to be quiet and stay put. This was important. She needed this job. The bills were piling up at home and the landlord had already knocked on their door twice this week. Daniel understood more than most kids his age. He had to. The Steinhardt Concert Hall was nothing like the places Daniel usually spent his time. Everything here was grand and polished. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floors were so shiny he could see his reflection. Even the walls seemed to whisper of money and importance. His mother had applied for a cleaning position. She wasn't proud about it, but pride didn't pay rent. She worked 2 jobs already, but it still wasn't enough. When she saw the advertisement for a night shift custodian at the concert hall, she jumped at it. The pay was decent and the hours wouldn't conflict with her day job at the diner. Daniel tried to sit still, he really did. But 7-year-old boys aren't built for sitting still, especially not in silent, fancy waiting rooms. He counted the tiles on the ceiling. He studied the patterns in the carpet. He read every single word on the framed posters on the walls, even the ones he didn't understand. Then he heard it. Music. Faint, muffled, but definitely music. It was coming from somewhere beyond the big wooden doors at the end of the hallway. Piano music. Daniel's heart started beating faster. He loved piano music more than anything in the world. He glanced at his mother. She was reading through some papers, her lips moving silently as she practiced what she might say in the interview. She looked so worried. Daniel knew he shouldn't bother her, but that music. It pulled at him like a rope tied around his chest. He slid off the chair as quietly as he could. His worn-out sneakers made barely a sound on the thick carpet. He walked toward those wooden doors, following the music like it was a trail of breadcrumbs leading him home. The doors were heavy, but one of them was open, just a crack. Daniel peered through. His eyes went wide. The room beyond was enormous. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched back like waves frozen in time. But Daniel barely noticed them. His entire focus locked onto the stage, where a massive black piano sat under bright lights. It gleamed like something from a dream. A boy who looked like he was in college was playing. He was good, Daniel could tell. His fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease. Around the room, a few other young people sat waiting, probably for their turn to play. Near the stage stood a man in an expensive suit. He held a clipboard and watched the college student play with a critical eye. Every few seconds he would write something down. This had to be some kind of audition. Daniel knew he shouldn't go in, he knew it. But his feet moved anyway, carrying him through the door before his brain could stop them. He walked down the aisle slowly, his eyes never leaving the piano. The music washed over him and he felt it in his bones. He could see the notes in his mind, could feel how they would feel under his own fingers. Someone coughed. The college student stopped playing mid-phrase and suddenly everyone was looking at Daniel. The man with the clipboard turned around. His eyebrows shot up when he saw the small boy standing in the aisle, looking up at the stage with huge, hungry eyes. "Well, hello there," the man said. His voice was kind but also amused. "Are you lost, young man?" Daniel shook his head. He wanted to say something to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. The college students started whispering to each other. One of them giggled. "Where are your parents?" the man asked, walking toward Daniel. "My mom," Daniel managed to say. "She's in the waiting room. She's here for a job interview." "I see." The man studied Daniel for a moment. "And you heard the music?" Daniel nodded eagerly. "The piano. I heard the piano." Something in the man's expression softened. He glanced back at the stage, then back at Daniel. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Do you like piano music?" "I love it," Daniel said, and there was so much feeling in those 3 words that the man actually took a step back. "Have you ever played?" Daniel nodded again, more vigorously this time. The man seemed to make a decision. He gestured toward the stage with his clipboard. "Would you like to try? Just for fun?" The whispering among the college students grew louder. One of them laughed outright. "Mr. Hastings, seriously?" A girl in a fancy black dress said, "We have a schedule to keep." The man, Mr. Hastings, turned to look at her. "We have time for one more." Besides, when was the last time any of you played just for the joy of it? That shut them up, though Daniel could still see the smirks on their faces. They thought this was funny. They thought he was just some random kid who would bang on the keys like a monkey. Daniel didn't care what they thought. He was already climbing the steps to the stage, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. The piano was even more beautiful up close. The wood was polished to perfection. The keys were ivory and ebony, and they seemed to glow under the stage lights. This wasn't like the piano he was used to. This was something else entirely. He climbed onto the bench. His legs still didn't quite reach the floor, so he had to scoot forward. He looked at the keys for a long moment, just drinking in the sight of them. Behind him, he heard someone whisper, "This is ridiculous." Another voice said, "He's just a kid." Mr. Hastings' laugh carried across the auditorium. "He's just a kid," he repeated, clearly entertained by the whole situation. "Let's see what he can do." "Go ahead, son. Play us something." Daniel placed his hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under his fingers. He took a deep breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The room waited. Daniel could feel their expectations, their amusement, their certainty that this would be a waste of time. Then he began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure. Then the second. Then the third. And suddenly Daniel wasn't in the concert hall anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere the music lived, and all he had to do was let it flow through him. His small fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that seemed impossible. The melody started simple, almost childlike, but then it began to grow. It became more complex, more layered. His left hand added depth while his right hand danced across the higher notes. The whispering stopped. The smirks faded. One by one, the college students sat up straighter in their seats. Their expressions changed from amusement to confusion to something that looked a lot like shock. Mr. Hastings' clipboard slipped from his hand. It clattered on the floor, but he didn't notice. He stood frozen, staring at the small boy on the bench, his mouth slightly open. Daniel played on, lost in the music. He didn't see their faces. He didn't hear their gasps. He was somewhere else, somewhere beautiful, letting the music pour out of him like water from a spring. The piece he played wasn't something simple. It wasn't chopsticks or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It was real music, complex and emotional and technically challenging. His fingers flew across the keys with precision that should have taken decades to develop. Where had this child learned to play like this? The question hung in the air, unspoken but present in everyone's mind. This wasn't normal. This wasn't what happened when you put a random 7-year-old in front of a piano. This was something else. This was something extraordinary. The music filled every corner of the Steinhardt concert hall. It wrapped around the velvet seats, climbed the walls, and seemed to make even the crystal chandeliers tremble with emotion. And at the center of it all sat Daniel, a 7-year-old boy whose feet dangled above the floor, playing like someone possessed by the ghost of a master pianist. His eyes were closed now. His face showed complete concentration, but also something else. Peace. Pure, absolute peace. Whatever struggles existed in his young life, whatever worries kept him up at night, they all disappeared when he played. The melody shifted. What had started as something bright and hopeful began to take on darker tones. Minor chords crept in. The tempo slowed. Daniel's playing became more emotional, more raw. It was as if he was telling a story without words, and everyone in that room could feel it. One of the college students, a young woman who had been so confident in her own audition just minutes before, felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed. But when she glanced around, she saw she wasn't alone. Another student had his hand pressed to his mouth. Even the girl in the fancy black dress who had complained about the schedule sat perfectly still, completely mesmerized. Mr. Hastings had moved closer to the stage without realizing it. He stood at the base of the steps looking up at Daniel like he was witnessing something he couldn't quite believe. In his 30 years as music director of the Steinhardt Concert Hall, he had heard thousands of pianists, professionals, child prodigies from wealthy families who had studied since they could walk, competition winners, concert performers, but this was different. It wasn't just the technical skill, though that alone was remarkable. It was the emotion, the depth. 7-year-olds didn't play with this kind of feeling. They couldn't. They hadn't lived enough life to understand what these notes meant, what they were expressing. Yet here was Daniel, pouring his heart out through the keys and somehow making everyone in the room feel things they couldn't quite name. The piece built toward a climax. Daniel's hands moved faster, covering more of the keyboard. His small body swayed slightly with the music. His fingers struck the keys with perfect precision, never missing, never hesitating. The sound grew bigger, fuller, more powerful. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The final note hung in the air, sustained by the piano's natural resonance, slowly fading into silence. Daniel's hands remained on the keys for a moment. Then he lowered them to his lap. He opened his eyes and blinked like someone waking from a deep sleep. The silence that followed was profound. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Daniel turned around on the bench, suddenly remembering where he was. He saw all the faces staring at him, and for the first time he looked nervous. Had he done something wrong? He couldn't tell if they were angry or shocked or what. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to take too long." His small voice broke the spell. Mr. Hastings seemed to shake himself back to awareness. He walked toward the stage slowly, his legs feeling oddly unsteady. He climbed the steps and approached the piano bench. Daniel watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. Mr. Hastings knelt down beside the bench so he could look Daniel in the eye. Up close, he could see that the boy's sneakers had holes in them. His clothes were clean but worn thin from too many washings. There was a tiredness in his eyes that no 7-year-old should have. "What's your name, son?" "Daniel," the boy whispered. "Daniel." Mr. Hastings said the name like it was important, like he was committing it to memory. "That was... Daniel, where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel shrugged. Around. Mr. Hastings' eyebrows went up. "Daniel, I need you to understand something. What you just did, what you just played, that's not something you learn around. Do you take lessons? Do you have a teacher?" Daniel shook his head. "You've never had a piano teacher?" "No, sir." Mr. Hastings sat back on his heels. "Then where? Where do you practice?" "Do you have a piano at home?" Daniel almost laughed at that. "A piano at home. That would be nice." "No, sir. We don't have room for a piano. We live in a small apartment." "Then where?" Mr. Hastings asked again, more gently this time. Before Daniel could answer, the auditorium doors burst open. His mother rushed in, looking panicked. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." She hurried down the aisle, her worn purse bouncing against her side. "I told him to stay in the waiting room." "I'm so sorry, sir. He just loves music so much, and when he hears a piano, he can't help himself." She reached the stage and grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him off the bench. "Come on, baby. Let's not bother these people anymore." "Wait." Mr. Hastings stood up. "Please wait. You're his mother?" "Yes, sir. I'm Rita Chen. I'm here for the custodian interview. I apologize for my son. He didn't mean any harm." "Harm?" Mr. Hastings looked at her like she was speaking another language. "Mrs. Chen, your son just played one of the most remarkable piano performances I've heard in my entire career." Rita stopped pulling Daniel. She looked at Mr. Hastings, then at her son, then back at Mr. Hastings. "What?" "Your son is extraordinarily gifted. I need to know where he learned to play." Rita's face showed confusion mixed with a mother's protective instinct. "He taught himself mostly. There's a piano at the grocery store where we shop. They let him play it on Saturdays while I get our food. He just sits there and plays for an hour or so." "A grocery store piano," Mr. Hastings repeated slowly. "It's not much," Rita said defensively. "It's old and some of the keys stick, but the manager is nice about it. Daniel loves it so much and it doesn't cost anything, so..." "How long has he been playing?" "About 2 years, I think. Maybe a little more. He started when he was 5. Mr. Hastings did the math in his head. 2 years of practice on a broken grocery store piano. No teacher, no formal training. And Daniel could play like that. "Mrs. Chen," he said carefully, "has anyone ever told you that your son is a prodigy?" Rita laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "A prodigy? No, sir. He's just a kid who likes music." "He's not just a kid." Mr. Hastings turned to look at the college students still sitting in their seats. "Would any of you like to tell Mrs. Chen what you just witnessed?" The young woman who had cried spoke up. "That was incredible. I've been studying piano for 15 years and I couldn't play with that much emotion if my life depended on it." Another student nodded. I thought it was a joke at first, but then he started playing and I've never heard anything like that. Rita looked at all of them, then down at Daniel. Her son stared at his shoes, embarrassed by all the attention. Mr. Hastings pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Chen, I need to make a call. Would you mind waiting here for just a few minutes?" "I have my interview," Rita said hesitantly. "I'll handle that," Mr. Hastings said. "Consider yourself hired for the custodian position if you want it. But right now I need to call someone about Daniel." He walked away, already dialing. Rita could hear pieces of his conversation. Words like exceptional and scholarship, and immediately floated back to her. She sat down in one of the auditorium seats, pulling Daniel down beside her. "Baby, what did you play up there?" Daniel thought about it. "I don't know what it's called. I just played what I heard in my head." "What you heard in your head?" "Yeah, the music is always there in my head. I just let it come out through my fingers." Rita stared at her son. She had known he loved music. She had known he was good at piano. But this, she had no idea. Mr. Hastings came back, his face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Chen, I just spoke with Gregory Walsh. He's the benefactor who funds our scholarship program. He wants to meet Daniel." "Scholarship?" Rita's voice came out as a squeak. "For the Riverdale Music Academy. It's one of the best music schools in the country. Full scholarship. Everything paid for. Lessons, materials, everything." Rita felt the room spin a little. "Sir, I don't understand." "We can't afford—" "You don't have to afford anything. That's what a full scholarship means. Daniel would study there for free, with the best teachers money can buy." The words didn't make sense. Things like this didn't happen to people like them. "Why?" Rita asked. "Why would someone do that?" Mr. Hastings looked at Daniel. "Because your son has a gift that comes along once in a generation. Maybe less. And gifts like that deserve to be nurtured." Daniel looked up at his mother. He saw tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. The next Saturday, Rita took Daniel to the grocery store like she always did. But this time felt different. Everything felt different. 3 days had passed since the audition. 3 days since Mr. Hastings had called Gregory Walsh. 3 days since their entire world had been turned upside down. Daniel walked beside his mother, his hand in hers past the shopping carts and the automatic doors. And there it was. The piano. His piano. The old upright that sat near the entrance, squeezed between the flower display and the bulletin board covered in community announcements. It looked smaller than he remembered. More worn, the wood was scratched and faded. Some of the keys were yellowed with age. There was still that sticky key in the middle that didn't always work right, but Daniel loved it like people love old friends. "Go ahead, baby," Rita said softly. "Play for a bit while I shop." Daniel climbed onto the bench. He didn't need it explained to him that this might be one of the last times. That starting Monday he would have access to real pianos and practice rooms at the Riverdale Music Academy. That everything was about to change. He put his fingers on the keys and started to play. Nothing fancy this time, just a simple melody that made him think of sunshine and his mother's smile. An elderly woman pushing a cart stopped to listen. She did this sometimes. Daniel had seen her before. She always smiled at him. Today she had tears in her eyes. "Beautiful," she said when he paused. "Just beautiful. You have a gift, young man." If only she knew how much people had been telling him that lately. Rita moved through the store with her list, but her mind was elsewhere. The meeting with Gregory Walsh kept replaying in her head. The wealthy businessman had sat across from Daniel in his huge office, asking the boy to play on his personal grand piano. Daniel had been nervous at first, intimidated by the expensive furniture and the wall of windows overlooking the city. But then his fingers touched the keys, and nothing else mattered. Mr. Walsh had listened with his eyes closed. When Daniel finished, the man had simply said, "When can he start?" Just like that. No questions about money or background or whether they could afford the uniform. Full scholarship. Books, supplies, lessons with masters who had trained at places like Juilliard and the Royal Academy. Everything. Rita grabbed a box of cereal, the store brand because it was cheaper. Old habits died hard. Even with Daniel's scholarship, she still had to think about every dollar. She still worked at the diner. She still needed the custodian job at the concert hall, which Mr. Hastings had made official. The scholarship covered Daniel's education, not their rent or food, but still. Her son was going to study at the Riverdale Music Academy. Kids from across the country competed for spots there, and Daniel was getting in because he taught himself to play on a broken grocery store piano. She grabbed milk and bread, her ears tuned to the distant sound of Daniel's playing. Other shoppers had stopped to listen. It happened every time. The store manager, Frank, once told her it was good for business. "People stay longer when your boy plays," he had said. "They're happier. They buy more. He's welcome here anytime." Frank appeared now, walking toward Rita with a big smile on his weathered face. "Hey, Rita, heard the news about Daniel. The whole neighborhood's talking about it." Word traveled fast in their community. Everyone knew everyone's business. "Yeah," Rita said, feeling shy about it. "It's pretty amazing. That kid of yours is special." "I always knew it," Frank paused. "We're going to miss him playing here on Saturdays." "He'll probably still come sometimes," Rita said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "This piano means a lot to him." "Tell you what," Frank said. "We were going to get rid of this old thing next month. It takes up space and half the keys don't work right anymore. But if Daniel wants it, it's his. I'll even pay to have it moved to your place." Rita's eyes widened. "Frank, I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not too much. It's just an old piano that would end up in a dumpster otherwise. And that boy loves it. Let him have it." Rita felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry at everything these days. "Thank you, Frank. Really, thank you." They would have to rearrange the entire apartment to fit a piano. Maybe get rid of the couch. But Daniel would have his own piano. His very own piano. Daniel finished his song and looked up to see his mother and Frank talking. He wondered what they were saying. They both looked happy, so it was probably good. He started another piece. This one was more complicated. He had heard it once on a video at the library and had been working it out in his head ever since. His fingers found the notes, stumbling occasionally, but mostly getting it right. A young mother with a baby in her cart stopped nearby. The baby had been crying, but when Daniel started playing, the little one went quiet, mesmerized by the music. "Thank you," the mother mouthed to Daniel. He just smiled and kept playing. Mr. Hastings had explained everything about the academy, the schedule, the expectations, the other students. Daniel would be the youngest by at least 2 years. Most of the students had been training since they were toddlers. They came from families where music was everything. Families who could afford private lessons and expensive instruments and summer programs in Europe. Daniel came from a family where his mother counted quarters to see if they could afford ice cream. Mr. Hastings had been honest about that part. "It might be difficult," he had said. "Not the music. You'll do fine with the music. But fitting in with the other students? That could be challenging." Rita had worried about that. She had seen the academy building, the pristine grounds, the students in their crisp uniforms walking with violin cases and sheet music folders. She had seen the parents picking them up in cars that cost more than she made in 5 years. How would Daniel fit into that world? But Mr. Walsh had added something that gave her hope. "Your son has something these other kids don't have," he had said. "He has hunger. He has real, genuine love for music. Not because his parents pushed him into it or because it looks good on college applications. He plays because he has to, because the music lives inside him and needs to come out." He had looked at Daniel with something like reverence. That's rare. That's precious. And that's what makes real artists. Now watching Daniel play his grocery store piano for the small crowd of shoppers, Rita understood what Mr. Walsh meant. Her son wasn't playing for applause or grades or approval. He was playing because this was who he was. An older man in a business suit stood listening, his hand resting on an empty cart. When Daniel finished, the man walked over and pressed a $10 bill into the boy's hand. "You're going to be famous someday," the man said. "I want to be able to say I heard you play before you were big." Daniel looked at the money, confused. He tried to give it back, but the man had already walked away. He took it to his mother. "Mama, that man gave me this." Rita looked at the $10 bill. Part of her wanted to refuse it to maintain their pride, but $10 bought a lot of rice and beans. "That was kind of him," she said quietly. "Thank you, baby." They finished shopping. Rita calculated costs in her head as she went, making sure she stayed under budget. Daniel helped load groceries onto the belt at checkout. The cashier, a woman named Dolores who had worked there forever, winked at him. "Heard you're going to that fancy school," she said. "Good for you, kiddo." Make us proud, everyone knew. Everyone was excited for him. It felt strange to be the center of so much attention. They walked home with their grocery bags, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Their apartment was 12 blocks away. They couldn't afford a car, so they walked everywhere. Daniel had long gotten used to it. "Are you scared?" Rita asked as they walked. "About starting at the new school?" Daniel thought about it. "A little. It's okay to be scared. Will the other kids like me?" Rita didn't know how to answer that. She wanted to say yes, but she also wanted to be honest. "Some will, some might not. But you know what? That's not why you're going there. Why am I going there? Because you love music, because you have a gift, and because everyone deserves a chance to become the best version of themselves." Daniel shifted his grocery bag to his other arm. "What if I'm not good enough?" Rita stopped walking. She knelt down right there on the sidewalk and looked her son in the eye. "Daniel Chen, you are good enough. You are more than good enough. Don't you ever forget that. But those other kids have been learning for so long. They have fancy pianos and real teachers. And you taught yourself on a grocery store piano. Do you know how incredible that is? Those other kids might have had every advantage, but you had something better. You had love. Pure love for music." Daniel hugged his mother, grocery bag and all. They got home and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment. Inside it was small and cramped, but it was clean and it was theirs. Rita started putting away groceries while Daniel sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Later that evening, after dinner, Rita made another decision. She called the number Mr. Hastings had given her. The Riverdale Music Academy looked like something from a movie. Brick buildings covered in ivy, manicured lawns, students walking around with instrument cases that probably cost more than Rita's monthly rent. Everything was so clean, so perfect, so expensive looking. Daniel held his mother's hand tighter as they walked through the main entrance on his first day. He wore his new uniform, crisp and stiff with newness. The scholarship had covered it along with everything else, but he still felt like he was wearing someone else's clothes. The hallways echoed with music. Violin scales from one room, a cello practicing somewhere upstairs, piano arpeggios floating through an open door. It was like the building itself breathed music. Mr. Hastings met them in the lobby. He had taken a special interest in Daniel, which Rita appreciated more than she could express. Having at least one friendly face in this place made everything less terrifying. "Ready for your first day?" Mr. Hastings asked, smiling at Daniel. Daniel nodded, though he didn't look particularly ready. "Your first instructor is Professor Mitchell. She's one of our best piano teachers. She's worked with competition winners, concert performers, the works. But I should warn you," Mr. Hastings paused, choosing his words carefully. "She can be demanding. She has high standards." That was an understatement, as Daniel would soon learn. Professor Mitchell stood about 5 feet tall, but somehow managed to seem much larger. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She looked at Daniel the way someone might look at a questionable piece of produce at the grocery store. "So you're the prodigy everyone's talking about," she said, her voice clipped and precise. "The boy who taught himself on a grocery store piano." Daniel nodded. "Can you read music?" "A little. I watched some videos at the library." Professor Mitchell's eyebrow went up. "Videos at the library. I see. And music theory? Do you know anything about chord progressions, harmonic structure, key signatures?" Daniel shook his head. "Of course not." She sighed like this was a personal burden. "Well, we have our work cut out for us, don't we?" "Sit." She pointed at the piano bench. Daniel sat. She placed a piece of sheet music in front of him. It looked like a foreign language. All those dots and lines and symbols. He recognized some of it from his library videos, but not enough. Not nearly enough. "Play that," she commanded. Daniel stared at the page. He tried to make sense of it. He could see where the notes went up and down, could guess at some of the rhythms, but the rest was just confusing. "I can't," he admitted quietly. "Speak up. Musicians must project." "I can't read it," Daniel said louder. "Not well enough." Professor Mitchell removed the sheet music. "Then play me something you know. Something you taught yourself." That Daniel could do. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The same piece he had played at his audition. The music that came from inside him, not from any page. He played beautifully. He knew he did. He could feel it working, could feel the emotion flowing through his fingers. When he finished, he looked up at Professor Mitchell, hoping for approval. Her face showed nothing. "Technically proficient," she said. "Good emotional expression, but completely undisciplined. You're playing by feel, not by knowledge." That won't work here. Daniel felt his heart sink. Don't misunderstand me, Professor Mitchell continued. You have talent, considerable talent. But talent without discipline is just noise. You need structure. You need theory. You need to understand what you're doing, not just feel it. Over the next few weeks, Daniel learned what demanding really meant. Professor Mitchell drilled him on scales until his fingers ached. She made him practice sight reading for hours, stumbling over notes he could have played perfectly if he'd just heard them first. She taught him about key signatures and time signatures and intervals and inversions until his head spun with terminology. And the worst part? He started to feel like he was getting worse instead of better. Before, when he played, it felt natural, easy, like breathing. Now, every time he sat at the piano, his head filled with rules and structures and proper technique. His playing became stiff, mechanical. The joy leaked out of it. The other students didn't help. Daniel had known it would be hard to fit in, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. The other kids at the academy had formed their friend groups years ago. They spoke in a language Daniel didn't quite understand, talking about summer programs in Italy and private concerts and famous teachers they'd studied with. At lunch, Daniel sat alone most days. He tried to join conversations, but he never quite knew what to say. When other kids talked about their expensive instruments or their practice rooms at home, what was he supposed to contribute? That he used to play on a broken piano at a grocery store? There was one boy in particular who seemed to take special pleasure in making Daniel feel small. His name was Preston. He was 9 years old but acted like he was the king of the academy. His family was old money, the kind that had buildings named after them. "Hey, grocery store boy," Preston said one day in the hallway, loud enough for others to hear. "Did you bring your shopping cart to practice today?" Some kids laughed. Others just looked uncomfortable. Daniel tried to ignore it, but words had a way of sticking in your brain. In practice sessions, he struggled. Other students could sight read pieces that Daniel couldn't even begin to puzzle out. They had been learning music theory since they were toddlers. They could look at a complex score and understand immediately what the composer intended. Daniel felt lost. Professor Mitchell noticed. She called him to her office after a particularly frustrating lesson. "You're trying too hard," she said. Daniel looked at her, confused. "But you said I needed discipline, structure." "Yes, but you're strangling your gift in the process." She leaned back in her chair. "When I first heard you play at your audition, do you know what impressed me most?" Daniel shook his head. "It was your honesty. The music came from somewhere real, somewhere deep. Now when you play, I hear a boy trying desperately to remember rules instead of trying to express something true. But I need to learn the rules. You said so. You do, but not at the expense of what makes you special." She paused. "Let me ask you something. Why did you start playing piano?" "Because I loved it. Do you still love it?" The question hit Daniel like a punch. Did he? Lately, practice felt like a chore. The piano, which had always been his friend, now felt like a test he was constantly failing. "I don't know," he admitted. Professor Mitchell nodded like this was exactly what she expected to hear. "You're not the first talented student to hit this wall. When you go from playing by instinct to studying music formally, there's an adjustment period. Some students never make it through. They lose what made them special in the first place. How do I make it through? You remember why you started? You remember that rules are tools, not chains. They're meant to enhance your expression, not replace it." That night, Daniel lay in his small bed in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The grocery store piano now sat in their living room. They had gotten rid of the couch to make room for it. His mother slept on a mattress on the floor now, so Daniel could have the bedroom. He thought about everything Professor Mitchell had said. He thought about Preston's mocking voice. He thought about the other students who could sight read anything while he struggled with simple pieces. Maybe he didn't belong at the academy after all. Maybe this whole thing had been a mistake. His mother appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the kitchen light. "Can't sleep? Mama, what if I'm not good enough?" She came and sat on the edge of his bed. "Bad day? Bad week? Bad month. Mama, I don't think I can do this." "Tell me what happened." So he did. Everything spilled out. The struggle with sight reading. The other kids who seemed so far ahead. Preston's taunts. The feeling that he was losing whatever made him special in the first place. Rita listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember when you first heard piano music? She finally asked. You were 5. We were at the community center for something. I don't even remember what. But they had an old piano and someone was playing it. You stopped dead in your tracks. You wouldn't move. You just stood there listening like you'd been hypnotized, Daniel remembered. He remembered exactly. I asked if you wanted to try playing and you looked at me like I'd offered you the moon. You sat at that piano and you just started experimenting with the keys. You weren't good. You made noise more than music. But you were so happy. That was different. How? I didn't know what I was doing. I was just playing. Exactly. Rita brushed hair off his forehead. Baby, somewhere along the way you've started thinking too much about being good instead of just being you. Those other kids might have had years of training, but you have something they don't. What? You remember what music is supposed to be. Saturday morning came with weak sunlight filtering through their apartment windows. Daniel woke up to the smell of his mother making breakfast. Eggs and toast. Simple, but good. He lay in bed for a while, thinking about everything. About the academy. About Professor Mitchell's words. About his mother's reminder of why he started playing in the first place. After breakfast, his mother had a surprise. Get dressed, she said. We're going somewhere. Where? You'll see. They took the bus across town. Daniel watched the neighborhoods change through the window. Familiar streets giving way to less familiar ones. His mother held a small notebook in her hands, turning it over and over. She seemed nervous about something. The bus stopped near the grocery store. Their old grocery store where the piano still sat by the entrance before Frank had given it to them. Why are we here? Daniel asked. You'll see, his mother said again. They walked into the store. Frank waved at them from behind the customer service counter. A few regular shoppers said hello, but Rita led Daniel past all of them, toward the back of the store, toward the office area where customers usually didn't go. Frank joined them, pulling out a set of keys. He unlocked a door Daniel had never noticed before. It led to a storage room, crowded with boxes and old shelving units and miscellaneous items. But in the middle of all that, clutter, sat another piano. Not just any piano. A grand piano. Dusty and neglected with a sheet draped over it, but unmistakably a grand piano. What is this? Daniel whispered. Frank grinned. This belonged to my mother. She was a piano teacher. Played professionally when she was younger. When she passed, I inherited it along with the store. Been in storage for almost 20 years. Never had the heart to sell it, but never knew what to do with it either. It's beautiful, Daniel said, moving closer. Try it out, Frank said. I had someone come tune it yesterday. Figure it was about time someone played it again. Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He pulled off the sheet, coughing at the dust it released. The piano gleamed underneath. Dark wood, ivory keys, the whole thing built with an elegance that took his breath away. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys. They felt different from any piano he had played before. Responsive, alive. He started to play. Just a simple melody at first, testing the instrument. The sound that came out was rich and full. Nothing like the tinny quality of the grocery store upright or even the practice pianos at the academy. This piano sang. Daniel's playing grew more confident. He forgot about technique and proper form and all the rules that had been stuffed into his head over the past months. He just played. Music poured out of him, real and honest and true. His mother watched with tears in her eyes. When he finished, Frank was wiping at his own eyes. My mother would have loved hearing that. She always said music should come from the heart first, brain second. Why are you showing us this? Rita asked. Because I've been watching young Daniel struggle, Frank said. Whole neighborhood has. He walks different now. Heavier. Like he's carrying a weight that's too big for his shoulders. I figure maybe he needs to remember why he fell in love with piano in the first place. Rita squeezed his hand. Thank you, Frank. There's more, Frank said. I've been thinking about my mother's piano just sitting back here gathering dust. Seems like a waste, so I have a proposal. Daniel, I'd like you to come here and practice whenever you want. Early morning before school, weekends, whenever. This piano is yours to use. Daniel looked at the instrument like he was seeing an angel. Really? Really? Only condition is you play from your heart. The way you did just now. None of that stiff, scared playing. Just you and the music. Over the next weeks, Daniel started going to Frank's storage room every morning before school. He would arrive when the store was just opening and play for an hour on the grand piano. No sheet music. No worrying about technique. Just playing. Something shifted inside him. At the academy, he still struggled with sight reading. He still stumbled over music theory. But slowly, very slowly, he started to find a balance. He learned to use the technical knowledge Professor Mitchell taught him, without letting it strangle his natural expression. It wasn't easy. Some days he wanted to quit. Some days the other students' whispers and Preston's taunts felt like too much to bear. But every morning he had that grand piano. That hour where music was pure again. Professor Mitchell noticed the change. "You're finding your way," she said one day after a lesson. "You're learning to be both disciplined and free. That's the balance every great musician must strike." Then came the spring recital. Every student at the academy had to perform. It was a big event with parents and donors and sometimes even scouts from music conservatories attending. Daniel was terrified. He had been assigned a classical piece to perform. Something by Chopin that was technically challenging and emotionally complex. He had practiced it until he could play it in his sleep. But standing backstage, waiting for his turn, doubt crept in. What if he messed up? What if everyone realized he didn't belong here? What if Preston was right and he was just the grocery store boy pretending to be something he wasn't? His mother found him in the wings. She wasn't supposed to be back here, but rules had never stopped Rita Chen when her son needed her. "Hey, baby," she said softly. "You okay?" Daniel shook his head. "I can't do this, Mama. Why not? What if I'm not good enough? All those people out there, they're expecting something amazing. What if I disappoint them?" Rita took his face in her hands the way she used to when he was very small. "Daniel Chen, listen to me." "You're not playing for them. You're not playing for the academy or the donors or anyone out there. You're playing for you. You're playing because music lives inside you and needs to come out. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. But what if I make a mistake?" "Then you make a mistake, so what? Even the greatest musicians in the world make mistakes. What matters is that you play from your heart." She kissed his forehead. "Remember that 5-year-old boy who heard piano music for the first time and looked at me like I'd offered him the moon? That boy is still inside you. Let him play tonight." Daniel's name was called. He walked onto the stage on legs that felt like water. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of faces looking at him. In the front row, he could see Mr. Hastings and Mr. Walsh. His mother stood in the back, right by the door, smiling at him. He sat at the grand piano on stage. It wasn't as nice as Frank's piano, but it was still beautiful. He looked at the keys and took a deep breath. For a moment, he heard Professor Mitchell's voice in his head. All the rules and techniques. Proper hand position, dynamic control, rhythmic precision. Then he heard his mother's voice. "Play from your heart." He started to play. The Chopin piece was difficult, full of runs and trills and emotional shifts. Daniel had been worried about playing it perfectly, about hitting every note exactly right, about showing everyone his technical skill. But as his fingers touched the keys, something else took over. He wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He was feeling the music, living it. The sadness in the minor chords, the hope in the crescendos, the peace in the final resolution. He made a few mistakes. Small ones. Notes that didn't quite hit right, a tempo that wavered slightly. But he didn't stop. He didn't panic. He just kept playing, letting the music flow through him. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. That profound quiet that sometimes follows a good performance. Then the auditorium erupted. People stood up. They clapped and cheered. Daniel looked out at the audience, shocked. His mother was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth. Mr. Hastings was on his feet, applauding loudly. Even some of the students who had ignored him all year were clapping enthusiastically. He looked to the side of the stage and saw Professor Mitchell. She wasn't clapping yet. She was just looking at him with a small smile on her face. Then she nodded just once. A simple acknowledgement, "You did it." Backstage, other students congratulated him. Even Preston walked up, though he looked like the words hurt coming out. "That was good," he mumbled. But the best moment came later after the recital ended and people were milling around in the lobby. An elderly couple approached Daniel. They looked important, dressed in expensive clothes, moving with the confidence of people used to being listened to. "Young man," the woman said, "that was one of the most moving performances I've heard in years. My husband and I fund a summer program for gifted musicians. We'd like you to apply." Daniel looked at his mother. Rita looked overwhelmed. Mr. Walsh appeared beside them. I think what Mrs. Bradford is trying to say is that Daniel has a very bright future ahead of him. Over the next few years, that prediction proved true. Daniel continued studying at the academy. The sight reading got easier. The music theory started to make sense. He learned to balance discipline with expression, technique with emotion. He still practiced on Frank's grand piano most mornings. He still lived in the small apartment with his mother. He still took the bus to school and ate lunch alone sometimes. But he also started winning competitions. Small ones at first, then regional ones, then national ones. By the time he turned 12, he was invited to perform with the city's Philharmonic Orchestra, the youngest soloist they had ever featured. The night of the performance, Daniel stood backstage in his concert clothes, ready to walk out in front of thousands of people. He wasn't scared this time. He was ready. His mother adjusted his collar. Proud of you, baby. I couldn't have done it without you, Mama. Yes, you could have. This gift has always been yours. I just made sure you had the chance to use it. Mr. Hastings came to wish him luck. Professor Mitchell gave him a rare smile. Frank had closed the grocery store early so he could attend. Even some of his classmates from the academy were in the audience. Daniel walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He sat at the magnificent grand piano, looked out at the sea of faces and smiled. He thought about that 5-year-old boy who had heard piano music for the first time. He thought about the broken upright at the grocery store where he had taught himself to play. He thought about every struggle, every doubt, every moment when he wanted to quit. And he thought about his mother's words. You're not playing for them. You're playing for you. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play.